this episode, we're going to be asking the question, can I get your honest opinion on feedback? So basically, over the next while, and I'll say while because we've got no idea how long this will run for, we're going to be looking at feedback, giving feedback, receiving feedback, when's the right time to think about giving it, when have you had it that you've maybe not wanted it, or that you've wanted feedback and the opposite, you haven't had any at all. But before we start, if this is the first time tuning in, I'm Jamie, this is Jordan,
Yep.
and this is the Beginner's Handbook. So what we aim to do doesn't necessarily mean we always get to do it or we actually achieve it, is what we try and do is we try and get beginner players either more comfortable playing D&D and other role-playing games as well, that the advice will kind of merge into for other games, other systems, or get people started playing. That's the attempt, that's the goal. Whether it works or not, that's a different thing. It doesn't mean, of course, that we're excluding more experienced players that are out there as well. So if you guys are about and you've got your advice and what you think, then check us out on our other social media platforms, leave us comments, suggestions, tips, and engage with each other as well. But feedback,
It's an interesting subject, and actually speaking about comments and things, it's just another form of feedback. Even when Jamie's speaking about more experienced players, maybe getting involved, or players or DMs that listen to the podcast, it's still, even we're not perfect at this either. I've been running games we've both been playing for like 3 years, and then we've got various kind of running games experience, and we're always getting better. Most of the time it's because kind of organically we get feedback, but sometimes what tends to happen is you actually get given it, or you ask for it, which is a common one. Even this week, I was running a game called Cult Divinity Lost. It's a kind of more hardcore horror type thing, but it can be very, very difficult. And I love horror, but this generally is very horrible, so I asked the players for feedback, and they were quite happy with it. It was people I know quite closely, so they were pretty open and honest. But that's, everything was constructive, and we'll maybe come on to constructive criticism versus just flat out criticism, and when to give or when not to give one or the other. It's quite important. So the question to ask you guys is, if you have been running games, if you're experienced, or even if you've never ran a game but you've played it, and you've been either asked for feedback or given it, would love to hear your experience. How did it go? Was it bad? Was it good feedback? How did the person on the other end receive it, if they were running or playing it? We'd love to kind of hear some of your experiences, just to kind of contrast with what we are sharing with ourselves.
Yeah, and again, that's the thing. Like, if the more we can hear from whoever's out there listening or watching, depending on where you're getting us just now, then the more we can figure out what's a good topic to look at for the future. So let us know. Fire away. Again, suggestions are always welcome, so just do your thing. Yeah,
and if you don't suggest, you'll just have to listen to the stuff that we actually suggest ourselves, and there's been a few that I've suggested and ran with over the last kind of couple times we've done some episodes. So woe be to you if you have to listen to the stuff I want to talk about.
Donkey Bingo was a bit of a strange one.
Yes, it was, but it was actually very fun for me.
And the donkeys.
That's true. So why don't we actually kick it off then? So I think one of the first things I want to speak about today, Jamie, is we'll start with providing feedback and maybe go into actually... so we'll start with you giving feedback or providing it, and then we'll speak about maybe how we've been when we've been given it ourselves. So starting with us giving feedback, is there any kind of times that you'd like to talk about that maybe you've had to give feedback, maybe share a bit of that with us?
I don't think I've ever had to give feedback, if you understand me there. And I'm trying to think if there's been a time where I've been, out and out asked, and I'm not 100% sure if I have or not, actually thinking about it. But what I've done here and there is if I've had a kind of, somebody skirting around the subject, then I'll bring it up into the conversation, and I'll go, and I'll be honest. There's no point in not being honest. But what we'll do is I'll focus on something that's a positive from what happened. The reason that will always do that or tend to do that is because if you've not got somebody that's out and out asking you, then chances are they're either a shy person or they're not 100% sure that what they've done has been successful, so they're a bit kind of anxious about hearing other people's opinions, or there's something going on with them that's stopping them from just asking you direct and asking you straight. That being said, if it is somebody that did ask me straight, I wouldn't necessarily jump in straight with a negative if there was something that I didn't like. Again, I would probably focus on a positive, but I'd maybe do a kind of, a positive followed by a negative, and then use that to kind of balance out and then work my way through whatever it was that I thought. But ultimately, the long and the short is, there's no point in just saying something for the sake of it.
Yeah, that's actually interesting. Sorry, if you were going to...
I was just going to say, it doesn't help anything, if if there's a game that you really, really, really didn't enjoy, then, as an example, if it was... If you were running a horror game, just as an example, and I'm somebody who's squeamish and I just have a terrible time from start to finish, right? It was the wrong setting, we started playing at 3 a.m. on Halloween, and you stack it as much as you want to be how terrible it's going to be. What I would say as the player giving the feedback to you, rather than that was terrible, I didn't like it. Because number one, what does that achieve? You've not given any context about what's going on, but there's no point in going, oh, that was great, that was fantastic, well done, because then what happens is next week when you turn up, it's another horror game, so there's no point in not being honest. But what you can do at that point is, rather than saying that wasn't good, just at that point, if you're honest and you just go, right, well, that wasn't the setting for me, but with the way the pacing was, this, that, whatever, that was good for other people there, but for me, not my kind of thing, sorry. And in that particular case, you are being honest, but if you kind of take the hit for it, and I think I've mentioned this in a previous episode under a different context, but if you take the hit for it, if it's something that just overall you did not enjoy and you can't think of anything that's jumping out as being positive, then you take the hit, you take the blame, because then what you're doing is you're still getting your opinion across, but you're diffusing any potential tension there of, it was your fault, you never done this, you never done that. And although that might not be the way that you say it or the way that you put it across, it's really easy for people to kind of read into things that just isn't there.
Either it exists or does not exist. It's actually, we don't actually often talk about this kind of stuff around D&D and things, because generally when we're catching up, we're playing, or one of us is running or whatever it is. But what's just occurred to me when you were talking there was actually, I quite often, it's interesting when you say sometimes asking for or when you've provided feedback, it's because it's kind of came up but not directly, and because I've noticed even like this week running those cult games I was talking about, even just with the D&D, with one of the groups I run with quite frequently, frequently, but it's like we play a lot and then we don't play for like 3 months, and then we play a wee bit for 4 weeks in a row and then don't play for 3 months. But I tend to ask them quite a bit. I tend to often be like, oh, how was that? I introduced my first big dream sequence with these guys, to give an example. And it was, I planned it out, but I didn't realise it was going to be quite because there was a wee mini fight in there and all that, and ended up knocking 2 of them down out of the 3 of them. And I went, oh, Christ. whoops. But it wasn't like I thought much into fighting, like a combat sequence. That wasn't the point. The point was about this big reveal in a campaign that I've made with them. So I tend to ask for feedback quite a lot. So I'm quite often getting feedback. Generally it's after a game or something. So it's just interesting how your kind of perspective has been. Maybe not directly asked for, because for me actually, I suppose it's maybe actually dependent on who's running and playing it, because with the other guys that I mentioned I'm running stuff for, I've been encouraging them to run their own games, and one of the guys has started that, I think, as of last week. But he's the same. He tends to ask for feedback as well. So actually, feedback is quite organic, and a lot of the time it isn't. Maybe it's not so much like, "Can you provide me feedback?" It tends to be just how did that actually go, and we're just chatting about the game overall, almost like having a review of it. Just what happened in that game, and it was like, "Oh, that was cool. I thought that was great." And actually, we tend to quite often provide feedback informally. It's not like he's ever asking for it like directly. It tends to just be, "Oh, I thought that bit was great," when we're discussing the game after it. Because I don't actually, thinking about it now, I don't think, like yourself, I don't think I've ever been asked, at least not with our group, the group we generally run with. I've maybe been asked outright once or twice. But it's interesting because actually the summaries of the games don't tend to happen, which is a bit of a shame, because there's been some great moments in the stuff we've done, and we've probably never had that feedback loop now that I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, I mean, again, like after a game, we might stay and we might talk about events from that game, but we've never really sat and went, this particular scenario was good and the reasons are this, the kind of... What's what I'm looking for?
I know where you're going with it, and I'm more with the guys that I'm talking to. They tend, I suppose maybe part of it is we play quite late, but then so do we with the other group. What tends to happen more to kind of give a better idea is we tend to just talk about the game, after it, maybe how it went and stuff, because we're just chatting about it, because usually we're up to who knows when in the morning, so we might finish about 12:30 and then we'll be up to 3:30, and these guys like to party, so we'll be partying, but we'll be talking about it. So even if we're not kind of saying, "I thought this worked and what didn't work," although that sometimes comes out of it, with ourselves, we don't tend to actually have that, even if it's just kind of talking about the game and stuff or whatever. There doesn't tend to be that discussion. It's probably mostly because of the time and stuff. It doesn't quite suit everybody, I don't think.
The thing is, though, you sit and you go, well, what about the next day or a couple of days after? There's time in between it, and again, one of the other guys I see quite frequently as well, so we don't really talk about it then either. So it's thinking about it now, and kind of for the first time and on camera, and maybe we should have thought about this a bit more in detail before we put these poor people through this.
Oh no, of course not. This is the conversation live,
Yeah, but it is a bit, I don't know if strange is the right word, but thinking about it now, it is a bit bizarre. And thinking with this particular campaign that we're talking about, again, that's been going on since pretty much the start of lockdown, so you're 3 months maybe into the kind of pandemic stuff, so you're talking July, June 2020 roughly.
Yeah.
It hasn't happened during that, but then thinking about it for any campaign beforehand or any one-off game beforehand, I can't think about it happening then either, even when everybody was pretty new.
Yeah.
Which I'm now thinking is maybe a bit strange.
It's just interesting. It's not like, so really what I'm kind of getting at with this kind of point and talking about providing feedback is, it isn't like we have to always provide feedback. Yeah. But I wonder, actually, there's sometimes been bits, and like even maybe not with the guys in particular we're running with, but certainly in some of my experiences with games, sometimes I've had guys that have ran games kind of as they kind of think them like the permanent or the kind of lead DM or whatever. And sometimes what's actually happened with them is they tend to then design encounters and stuff, and it usually it's almost a bit off base sometimes. Sometimes it's almost designed usually you can see mid-game that you either see it on their face or they'll exclaim like, oh, the game maybe wasn't quite, it was maybe harsher than they expected, it took the wrong themes or it went the wrong direction, and it almost gets a bit lost. It's just interesting because I suppose a lot of times what I'm realising right now is when you're providing feedback is it's actually you're providing it during the game, just by the way that you actually roleplay it. I'll come back to that when you're sitting on the other side of the feedback and maybe how you can encourage it during the game.
Yeah, I mean, again, agreeing with you. Again, I think we talked about this in the how to start being a DM in that episode. If you've got a DM that's switched on, then ultimately they're getting feedback throughout the game. You know, because if they're monitoring the group and making sure that everybody seems engaged, and if they're making sure that nobody is particularly sitting and not contributing, and you know, all these other different things, then they then know themselves. If they're ticking all those boxes, then the game in theory is going well. If they spot one of those things or multiple versions of those things aren't happening, chances are the game isn't going that well, and that for next time it needs to be modified. So as long as you've got, again, somebody that's switched on, somebody that's empathetic, that's your DM, then they should be able to pick up those points as the game's going on without a need for somebody to, you know, write in an essay of, you know, 1,500 words or less.
Why it did not work.
Exactly.
And it's interesting.
And something else that I was thinking as we were talking there as well is, as you and I have talked about, you know, off mic, off camera before, remember it's a game. So, I mean, have you, just quick, a sub question for everybody that's listening or watching, and for you as well. Have you ever played a game of Monopoly and then at the end of it, have you get feedback off your mum, your dad, or your brother or your sister?
I think the last time I played Monopoly I was grounded mid-game. That actually is true. So we never got as far as the feedback. Well, I suppose there was technically feedback and it was you're grounded, but
your game playing is so bad you need to go to a room for the next month. No, but you get my point. Because that's a game, everybody accepts it's a game. People just play it, they pack it up when they're finished, and then that's it in the cupboard and dusted out in the next rainy day. Whereas with RPGs and other things, because there's a lot of things to juggle, you know, if you've got 6 people at the table, you're having to go around everybody individually and find out what they want to do. So if you're talking to somebody in that group, you've got 6 people there, you talk to person 1. By the time you get round to person number 6 and finish with them, person 1's been waiting there for 5 minutes not doing anything. So you get unique challenges from that you maybe don't get with, again, the likes of again, just sticking with the Monopoly example, roll the dice, move the piece, buy stuff, whatever, next person, okay, there's time waiting and sitting and all the rest of it, but the process is maybe a bit speedier because you can only do a limited set of things because you're stuck with the board, you're stuck with those rigid rules, and that's it. So as soon as you know how to play, you can get it moving, and you can get it moving quick. So, you know, there's that aspect as well, I suppose, that the feedback is so that things can stay slick, and again, because it's a creative process, you're not sticking rigid to rules that, again, you want to know if people are enjoying what you're doing. And the flip side, if you're doing it and you're really enjoying it, then it's probably a good thing to pass on to the person who's running the game for you, that, you know, whatever scenario it is, whether it's, again, like it's taking a more horror route, that if that's really caught you and caught your imagination, that you maybe want to let them know that, so that can make, you know, rather than the odd appearance in your game, that it maybe takes that route and stays on that path.
Yeah, and actually that kind of cycles back to when we were speaking about providing feedback. One thing when you're talking, especially if like you're enjoying your game, for example, you know, even unprompted, I think it's actually really valuable. So, for example, the guys that I'm talking about that I run kind of frequently, but infrequently at the same time with,
Mystery Inc.
Yes, the mystery guys. what I've done a lot, because at least two of them are really wanting to run games, and two of them have after kind of playing this game that I've kind of made up for them, really, and really have made up because of them. We played that for about a year. But the main thing for me is they were both of the guys. One's kind of a bit kind of I need to work on it, and really that's kind of code for, I'm kind of not ready to run a game yet, and that's okay. But one of the guys, he's also kind of making his own campaign. He's not sure about running it yet, but he's also bought a campaign that he can pick up and run, like a store-bought one. Like, for example, I've got Curse of Strahd, whereas I can't remember the one he's got, but it's a store-bought one.
Yeah.
But what's great about it is he's just went, you know what, screw it, I'm going to go and do it. And it was great. The first game he done was really good. I mean, he was really into it. He had voices, which totally threw me. Like, I was like, whoa, I didn't expect this. So it encouraged other people at the table to do voices, and that's kind of almost like some feedback for him, being like, oh, he's actually hit something, struck a proper chord where it's made people comfortable the way he's approached the game. I don't tend to do a lot of voices because I'm just bad at them, so I don't do them, because sometimes it has the opposite effect. When I've got a nice scary character and I try a voice and people just start laughing, I go, okay, I'll just take that back. But for him, what I've been quite open with is, and what I would encourage people, like any of the games that we do, even, if you're enjoying a sort of game, or any game that someone's running for you and things are going well, it's worth unprompted actually suggesting, that's great, I really like this bit. If you like horror games, I love the scary elements, what about those elements were good? And actually, I never actually expected to break down how to provide good feedback, but I suppose we can cover that later. But one of these things that I make sure I do is, when I'm providing the feedback, I make sure if there's something I really enjoy, I'll tell them, and I'll tell them and I'll really mean it, because the guy I know did a really good job when he done it, and I told him and made sure to tell him, and I explained why that was actually good. I never really said where to go from there, because that wasn't what we were doing. But when it comes back to the kind of more negative stuff, if there is anything, it's one of these things I don't think I tend to offer, unless I can tell someone's struggling. Like, this didn't really happen with the person that I was talking about a second ago, but if there was a moment where he was like kind of struggling to get the story going, or if we were all on a sticking point, or everybody was confused, that tends to be because there's maybe narrative stuff being missed, or maybe not even just narrative, but maybe the campaign's too difficult, or so that means everybody's not sure what actions to take. Anything that can complicate it and slow everything down and make it a more boring game. That's something that I don't really tend to suggest, unless I can see someone struggling. I'll be like, hey, what do you think about this? And I think the difference, or the dynamic that this group has, is they've kind of seen me as the guy that does most of the games. Yeah. So they tend to actually stick by and ask for a bit of advice when they're a bit stuck. So it's interesting. I think the kind of key for me then, kind of coming out of this conversation, is if you're going to provide feedback, one, if it's good, you should just give it, and give it a lot, because it feels good when somebody does really enjoy the game, and it helps encourage the creativity of the person running the game. But I think one thing to take note of is, if it's going to be bad feedback, is make sure just make sure you understand your group. Do you know them? There's guys that I play with on Mondays, and there's some that I don't know, some I get on with, and some I know really well. And I've ran and played for them, but there's certainly people that I would, if something went bad, they would probably ask, how did that actually go? Was it good or bad? If it was bad, I would explain what's good, and I would say what's bad, but there wouldn't be bad feelings. But there's definitely at least one or two people there that if something went bad in the game and they'd ask me for advice, or what didn't work, I would need to approach it differently. Maybe do it softening it, like what you were talking about. But yeah, I think generally though, the feedback I tend to offer is, and I tend to just offer positive feedback, because ultimately it's games. If stuff doesn't work out, usually that person running the game will figure that bit out. Or if I'll ask them, how did you think that went? That's something I quite often do if I've got bad feedback. I do it for both good and bad, but if there is something bad, I'll tend to ask them what they think didn't work, and if something that maybe I didn't think worked or didn't enjoy about the game is something that they then bring up, then that's actually a nice pathway to kind of meet them in the middle and describe the kind of more negative stuff about the feedback. generally though it's all been received quite well. You know, I don't know. Is there any feedback that you've given that's been received? There's maybe one case, but maybe you can start with your case that went well.
In terms of giving out feedback, to my knowledge, nothing is struck a nerve anywhere. To my knowledge, that doesn't mean that's the case. But again, it's like you're saying, that even if it's somebody that you know that you think is a robust character and you know whatever else, I will still avoid just giving a negative, and I will avoid, you know, that as well as just being given a negative. I'll also, if I'm going, right, okay, well, I need to put that out there, because if I don't, I'm going to end up trapped in a situation that I don't want to be in. Then I'll use the kind of, you know, here's a good thing, here's the negative, but, you know, there's the good thing to kind of offset it. And again, ultimately, it's not that you're being cynical about it and you're going, well, I'll just say that because I'll make them feel a bit better if they do take it, you know, a bit hard. You are still telling the truth, you're still, you know, putting forward what you liked, and ultimately that's the difference between being critical of somebody and then giving them a critique. You know, the difference is, you know, one, you're being negative for the sake of it. The other one, you want somebody to take the advice and then build on it, and then either improve or relax into the game a bit more, or, you know, for whatever reason that you're giving it out. So, you know, those positive points that you're given, you do, again, genuinely believe them, and there is something that you think is useful there for them to take forward.
Yeah, totally. I mean, the only time I think feedback's ever been, not maybe strictly directly off of me, but it's more just like the person running the game had received mid-game. No, it was one of these games that was impromptu, but it was actually a game that the person in particular designed. Kind of, they spent time building it. It was their first time running the game, and it was with a few people that were all really close. So it was me and a couple other people with, we'll just call them person A, running the game. And they wanted something a bit kind of more scary, but kind of light enough, but with kind of scary undertones. And all our characters were just stupid. There was stupid characters. I can't remember the system though. It wasn't D&D. Goblin Quest seems to ring a bell. I don't know if it was Goblin Quest, but anyway, I think it was, because there's a Cthulhu expansion or something to it. So anyway, we had all these stupid Eldritch type guys, and it was a whole bit of nonsense. And I could tell straight away, and I started seeing, this person's getting a bit like, oh no, this wasn't the tone that we're going for. Now, there's plenty of reasons why that kind of went wrong, so to speak. By the end of it was still a good game by the end, you know, but what tended to happen was they were kind of like, how come you're not listening and stuff, or how come you're not doing X, or how come you're always being like this? And that was kind of asking for a bit of like our thinking, but the thinking kind of reflected in, we thought this was just a stupid wee game we were playing, you know, and that is kind of can be taken as kind of feedback, you know, for maybe how they would maybe organise a game next time and stuff. But it was just interesting. But what I actually found was, it's difficult. Positive feedback's easy to give. Negative stuff isn't so much. And the approach is, if you're going to offer it, or at least be asked it, it's just be careful. And I think the main thing is be mindful of the other person, especially if they've maybe put in some time, because the negative feedback can actually be really what's the word? It can be really off-putting, you know. It can really kind of deject from the experience, and even if you deliver it quite strongly, you know, it can kind of sour the experience a bit, I think, for at least I've seen this happen. That kind of leads me into actually experience of being given feedback then. So this will be interesting, because I've had quite a bit of feedback. Now, depending on the group that I'm running for, the kind of three out of the three main groups that I've ran games for, and ours will be one of them. There's almost three different types that I get feedback. So I'll maybe open it with you first. Have you got any experiences? We'll maybe start with bad, because that will be the stuff that's easy to kind of maybe talk about, and then talk about the positive stuff. or pick and choose, just do what you want. Is there any experiences of good or bad feedback that you've maybe been given now? And if so, actually, before I even ask, how did you take it? You know, how did that actually come about? That feedback.
I'm trying to think how it actually came about.
It's probably a while ago, actually.
Yeah, the particular game that I'm thinking of that's the kind of best example of it was again a decent while ago, so I'm trying to think how it came about. I think what happened was that it came kind of just direct in conversation, and this is with, again, one of the guys that I see quite often.
Yeah.
So it was actually in person that I got this, rather than, text, or when we were there in Roll20 for another game, or or even at the table with other people being there. So it was one-on-one.
Mm-hmm.
So ultimately with that, you go, well, for me personally, you're going to, I'd put a tick in the positive column for that, in terms of if you were then giving that advice out, because it then means that if the person is, again, a bit shy or a bit embarrassed with what you tell them or whatever, then it's just you and them, and that's it. Nobody else is there to overhear it, and so on and so on. So that was decent. The flip side of that is the exact quote, and I don't know if I've ever told you this or not before.
I know the experience you're talking about. I don't think I've heard the exact quote though.
Right, so the exact quote, and I'll even redact the nickname for who this is, in case somebody manages to puzzle out who it is. So the kind of standard nickname to cover our tracks, that's redacted here for this one. But the exact quote was, it was almost like you fell out of the mistake tree and hit every branch on the way down.
Yes, I love it.
So there's a couple of things with that here. Number one, what a strange metaphor, right? Okay. Number two, if in the particular game, if you've seen previous episodes, was the Bond game that I ran, which, again, if you've seen the previous episodes, it was just chaos. It was an absolute nightmare.
I didn't help with that, by the way. I think I encouraged quite a bit of that as a player.
Well, rather than what happened in the game, I'm just talking about the technological mishaps before we even got to the point of the game.
True. Aye.
It just, everything went wrong, basically. Computers stopped working, tried a second computer, it wasn't working. Things that were supposed to automatically trigger for sound didn't trigger, and then randomly 10 minutes later they triggered, and it was the weirdest malfunction I've ever seen across anything. And then boot the computer up next week, see what's happening for next week's game, and everything worked perfect. But anyway, that aside, right, so with that piece of feedback, you're going, right, okay, there's absolutely nothing there for me to learn from. Like, nothing. Like, and okay, there was the odd example that came afterwards, but I had to quiz and kind of probe to get information out.
Aye.
So there was nothing there to work with. So that was a criticism, that wasn't a critique. So there was nothing there that I could then use and take forward. Now, ultimately, when the wheels started falling off the cart, at that point I went, right, okay. At the start of the game I went, this is going so horribly wrong, the best thing to do is probably to stop here. But I went, everybody's turned up, everybody's expecting this. We cobbled things together and we got it working, we got it moving, albeit it wasn't as good as it could have been. And retrospect, looking back, we should have just called it quits. And we should have just moved on. So already had my own analysis done of what worked, what didn't work, and so on and so on. And then I'd never get anything back. So I found that quite frustrating, because I didn't need anybody to tell me that mistakes were made, because I knew that. And then you never get told what they were, so then, it was like trying to draw blood from a stone. It just was not, it wasn't productive, it wasn't fun, and it was a bit annoying, really. And that kind of ties into previously what we were saying about unsolicited feedback a little bit. You need to figure out each individual type of person and who they are and what's going on. And for me, the kind of person I am, a critique's all right as long as it's coming from a decent place and as long as there's something there to kind of work with. But when you're not getting information and it's just a criticism, then I shut off very quickly and very dramatically to that. So for me, that was the wrong thing to do. Now, ultimately, I know this person very well. We're friends and all the rest of it. It's not like an acquaintance that we have. So
yeah,
I know them, I know their personality and so on and so on. So, I brushed it off and, I never took it to heart and so on and so on. There wasn't any fallouts or anything. But if that was a different set of circumstances, then that would have been a totally different situation.
Yeah.
So that's one kind of example, and without getting drawn in too far with that, how it wasn't great. So and as well, timing was bad for that, because it was like a day or two later, so it wasn't there wasn't enough time to let the kind of dust settle. It was pretty quick, it was pretty immediate to it as well. So timing was off. The way it was delivered was, again, if you're asking me to be critical of it, was poor and should have been done differently. And other bits and pieces from that. So that was bad. The flip side of that, again, sticking with that same game for a kind of compare and contrast, was the feedback that you gave. And ultimately, it's kind of the opposite of what happened there with the other individual. That you didn't really say anything. All you really said was, it's a shame that the technology let you down and other things. I seen what you were trying to do. I'm a bit disappointed because, the way that I think it would have went. But do you know what? You tried your best, you kept moving, and, well done.
Yeah,
that's ultimately what you told me. So again, ultimately, you never told me anything that I could work with. You know what I mean? You never went, you see, what you do is, if the technology fails, then you turn it on and turn it off and back on again. You never gave me anything from that point of view. You never told me anything from a storytelling point of view, or this, that, whatever. All you done was, it's a shame it all went horribly wrong, but do you know what? You tried your best. Fair enough, well done. That's all you said. So ultimately, that's feedback. And you can look at it, that's just encouragement, that's not really feedback, that's not really giving you any pointers or anything. And yeah, okay, fair enough, but I kid you not, that it was so disastrous how it fell apart, and it was so difficult, because what we eventually had to do was use the computer for the webcam, but then we all had to kill the mics in the computers, and then we had to open up a voice call through WhatsApp to get sound, which then meant there was a delay as well. But if we didn't do it, there was feedback. So there was a lot of kind of quick thinking that had to be involved in working out what was going on and how to come up with a solution. So there was a lot of things to overcome just to get playing the game in the first place.
It took like an hour probably. I mean, the thing is,
maybe longer.
We could have had Zoom or something, but the fact at that point was there was people in that group that older computers don't use a lot. I mean, I'm that's my sort of job, technology and stuff, so that's no problem for me. But when you're already 40 minutes into troubleshooting, it's like I can't. Do you know what? We've got WhatsApp, and obviously that took some setup too. But imagine trying to get a video call up, getting the guys to download stuff that they might not already have,
set up accounts and
you
so
did.
on and
You
so
forgot
on.
one bit though, and I think I started my feedback off with I actually really enjoyed it because I did.
Well, yeah.
Because the thing is, while it was a complete disaster, because it was, and I don't mean like how you ran it or anything, just purely from the perspective of the kind of hardware issues. Yeah, it was such a shame. And the fact is, like, I actually had a really good time, and I'd said that to you. Now there was a couple times during the game where, and I'm sure you kind of already spoke about kind of how you were giving feedback about, offered one the individual that talked about the mistakes tree or whatever that analogy was. There was bits during the game where it was very clear that that things for at least for that person when they were really gelling. But I mean that's not stuff that you can really get feedback. The only feedback you can get from that is like it happens,
Yeah.
So. I'm not going to sit and a thing that he said that's quite good as well was actually I never realised this at the time, but I never really discussed a lot of the problems because you knew what they were in the first place. I didn't at the time when I was giving the feedback. I didn't realise that. I just thought, screw it, you can't really do anything about it. So
yeah. I mean, ultimately, like what they were talking about was in the game. What I'd done was I split the players up into two opposing teams, basically. Which again, the person went, okay, I know you're thinking about doing that, but I wouldn't do it because it's difficult to run and manage, and I got their opinion on it. So it was bits and pieces like that they were referring to when it was making every mistake.
Forgot.
Rather than specifically about the technology, just in case that wasn't clear now that I'm kind of thinking about that. So they were talking about what I'd done during the game and what I'd done during the story and things like that. That's what they were talking about. And one of the things that they particularly focused on was the opposing factions element of it, and that they felt that it didn't particularly work. That was one of the things that they focused on. And circling kind of onto another thing that they mentioned that again we talked about at some point in the past was one of the other pieces of feedback that I got that was something that I could work with, because again even the making the mistakes with the factions, well, I never get told particularly why they didn't think it worked. I never get told, well, here's why I didn't enjoy it, or here's why I didn't think it worked, so therefore I would have maybe tried this. I never get anything back from that point of view.
Yeah, I know what you're saying.
The only thing I really got back from them was before the game they asked us, well, obviously you as well and the other folk that were there, get asked what sort of tone the game was going to be in. Was it going to be serious? Was it going to be light-hearted? Somewhere in the middle? And I went, well, because it's kind of the first thing that I'm doing, make it light-hearted. That'll help cover mistakes. How wrong was I? Because I made everyone. But I thought I'll make it light-hearted. It'll help cover mistakes here and there, and ultimately it'll help me kind of ease into it. And blah blah blah. If you're trying to do it too serious, then it's probably not going to be that great. So anyway, right, light-hearted and whatever else. So I went, and then follow-up question to that was, right, okay, is it going to be not serious, or is it going to be kind of wacky? Is it going to be like, totally the kind of some of the spoof bonkers Austin Powers kind of spy stuff, rather than kind of more serious, the Bourne conspiracy kind of side of things. So I went, well, not too mental, but towards the kind of wacky side. So I then, in my head, never told anybody this, I went, I'm basically just going to say yes to every single request I get unless it's just too ridiculous. So Jordan ended up with a hot air balloon that was tricked out.
Yeah.
Was it bombs, grenades?
Bombs. There was a big LMG on it, so I could blast people from the sky. Just a lot of stupid stuff. On reflection, a hot air balloon with a mounted gun's not a good idea, because if somebody shoots up at you, it's going to pop.
Kind of tipping over just to the one side.
Well, is that true? Yeah. There's that as well.
Yeah, and as well in the Swiss Alps is maybe a bit of a dangerous mode of transport. But anyway, hot air balloon, tick, right, on you go. Another one of the players asked for a skateboard that kind of had a blade in the side of it as well and was tricked out. I went, yep, okay, fine, tick, let's do that. So, you know, I was basically saying yes to everything, and one of the players wanted a car, again, tricked out and all the rest of it. Right, great. So what do you want in it was the question, and the response I got back was the usual.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't really get much back to work with, but I kind of probed a bit and went, what's it just generically like, you know, the cars in the Bond film, you know, like an oil slick that you got told yes. So I went, right, okay, that's fine. I know what's going on. I get what people are wanting here. Anyway, following that through to the end of the game, and then the criticism and critiques that happened afterwards, I then get told from that player, it didn't really seem that zany, you know, it didn't really seem that off the wall. And again, I was kind of left scratching my head a little bit, because I was going, I gave you any form of transport you wanted. I wanted everybody to have a signature vehicle, and then I got a car that had the usual in it. And then the other thing that kind of made me scratch my head was the hot air balloon that crept in, and the kind of your character, which was a circus performer in the middle of this party, and you know, all the different other things that were going on that kind of made me scratch my head and go, I'd left a lot of what was coming back to the players, and then for one of the players to then tell me that they didn't think it was particularly off the wall, it just left me slightly confused at that point, because, you know, I'd left it really, really open to see what the players wanted, and the particular player that told me that it wasn't off the wall enough gave me the least information back, which I found really, really, really puzzling.
Yeah, I think the thing that's kind of becoming a bit clear, you know, I guess naturally you can figure this part of it out, but the thing for me that's quite obvious, because the problem with that game, you know, it's put you off, at least at the time, it put you off wanting to run a game for quite an extended period, because not only was it a disaster in terms of just you needing to manage that, I mean, because we can joke about it now, but I felt terrible. I mean, we all were just like, God, you know, I just after, because we spoke about it at a point afterwards, and we're just like, man, that is, when you're doing your first ever game, first ever game, you're trying to be ambitious with it, because I remember we spoke about the feedback at one point that you got about the whole, you know, not doing the faction thing and split that sort of splitting and contrast, and that's actually the stuff that I remember. I think I told you that I enjoyed about it, because it doesn't matter that it's difficult, you know, because that happens in games anyway. So I mean, if you're thinking of introducing anyone even that's listening is thinking of introducing things like opposing players, having it like, one of the things Jamie had done, if you've not heard any of the other episodes, was there was kind of delayed or periodic feedback that the factions would get privately. So but that means there's more to juggle, so I can see where the kind of constructive criticism part, I suppose you would have got, would have been like, you shouldn't do that, but to make it constructive it would be like, well, because it's harder to manage, you know, it adds more room for error, you know. But then again, we were doing something off the wall, and for me at least, my expectations from when you gave us all the kind of the brief or the kind of sales pitch for it, so to speak, was it would be wacky, you know, and whatever. So for me, especially when it's a first time game you're doing and you're taking risks, you know, like when I took it, now it was not a first time game, but the dream sequence I tested, or even running Cult Divinity Lost, I said to guys, like, I don't really get some of this, because it's not as, to give people context, like Cult's very kind of narrative driven, and things like combat doesn't really work like D&D or Call of Cthulhu, where you've got like general order to things. In Cult it's more narrative, which makes it hard to kind of step in and decide when things are happening. So I said to the guys, like, right, we'll just see how it goes, because we're trying some stuff that might not really work. And that's the sort of vibe that I got when we were talking about the split factions. I just thought, like, do you know what? It's your first time playing a game and you're designing kind of opposing factions. You're doing kind of more creative things about providing kind of periodic feedback that's private. You know, I really enjoyed that kind of gradual reveal of feedback, because it's sort of like how the spies do it, you know?
That was the kind of point of that, so that you're in the situation, the scenario, which is you're at a party, you then have to sneak in to the private section of the house where it is, and then get information out. General spy stuff, right? And then as you're moving about, you're getting updates as to what's happening elsewhere and things. That was as basic and as thought out as the concept was, and then I just gave information to, you know, the two opposing sides. And through doing it, like, before the game, again, the same person, one of the things they said to me basically was keep it simple, because it's the first time that you're doing it. And I talked about this idea and they went, it's maybe not a good idea because, you know, it'll be difficult to juggle, but, you know, do what you want. But I maybe wouldn't do it. So beforehand I got I got good advice rather than good feedback, but then afterwards I didn't get the best feedback from it. But that's basically what they were saying. And then one of the things that they said during it that, you know, they didn't like essentially was that aspect of it. So, you know, it's just kind of a bit kind of strange that beforehand the advice was good, but then afterwards the post-mortem of it wasn't so good from that point of view, which was, again, a bit kind of strange with it, that you think that each one would reflect well. And ultimately the reason that there was different factions in it, and there was the intelligence updates that came in periodically throughout the game, and that they were separate from both factions, and each faction was getting different information at different times. The reason that all came in was because it was the first time I was doing a game. I went, right, ultimately I'm going to make mistakes based on, you know, like when you look back on it in like a month's time, 2 months' time, a year, whatever, because ultimately you're doing it more, you're practicing, you're getting better. So I went, right, I can either make mistakes by playing it safe and try to keep it simple, which generically was the advice that everybody gave me and I ignored, but anyway, or I can make the mistakes by just going for it and try to do something different and try to make it as complex as I can while still being able to manage it. And ultimately, if the technology mishap didn't happen, then things would have ran smoother. As well as it running smoother, there also would have been more time. So the game felt a bit rushed as well, because it was dragging on a bit and it was getting late, and, you know, everything else that happened. So, you know, everything happened that kind of derailed it. But if that didn't happen, I think it would have been totally different and things would have been slicker, because I wouldn't have been knocked off my rhythm, because ultimately it took me a good while to kind of settle into it when we eventually got things working, because part of me was still seething that everything had stopped working. So I wasn't fully focused on what was going on. I was a bit distracted and everything else. But ultimately, like from my point, the opposing factions isn't the best idea depending on your players, and the way that our split worked, it meant that each faction was uneven, and I've tried to roughly balance it out. It didn't quite work, but that's something to think about, that again, looking back on it, wasn't the best. The intelligence update side of things, I thought that worked fine. Didn't think there was particularly anything too off with that. And then story wise and things, as a first attempt, alright, but you know, I'm not a particularly creative person. You know, I'm very kind of logical and, you know, working with facts and figures and things rather than, you know, being artsy or writing or anything like that. So as a first attempt, okay. So overall, if you ignore the technology mishap, I think it went okay. Factoring that in, disaster.
I mean, the thing is, ultimately, it was a good, enjoyable experience for me. And like the mistakes that happened during it, it's like, who cares? I mean, when you're running, it's the same thing. Although when the guy that I was talking about running his first game last week, that he's started his own campaign, it's the group I was talking about, he actually did a really good job. But the difference is we've, like, literally 2 weeks prior to that had games, and he's been talking to me about how to run it. He's kind of had the advice section. He didn't stick to it all either. I said, maybe don't try and make a huge story in your first ever game. Like, try if you want to do something crazy, try it. Because the difference though with like your first game and his first game is there's 7 or 8 of us even, and there was 3 players, so 7 players for this guy, we had 3. So I think, but who cares? The fact is, if he wanted to, the guy I'm talking about, if he wanted to go and do a stupid, crazy story, it's like, who cares? It's okay. It's all about making mistakes. And I think a big kind of lesson out of the kind of experience you had, I mean, especially if it's a first-time player, and by the way, do not crap on a first-time player who's just went and worked on their story, because they've probably put in more than what you should be putting into your first-time story. They're probably quite worried about it. They're probably not quite sure how it will go, and just a wee bit nervous actually even pulling the story out of their ass, and actually doing it. It's always worth being encouraging and kind of being a cheerleader for them, because even from my experience, I tend to get, I don't tend to get a lot of bad feedback, but it's because people don't tend to just openly share it, especially not if they don't really know you. Whereas, I mean, I think the good example from what you've shared is that's come from somebody we know really well, and we get on. And by the way, the bad feedback didn't cause issues in the group or anything. There was nothing like that. But it shows you actually how, like, giving feedback that's just criticism and nothing else is really bad. And we'll come on to that actually next. But before we do, like in my experience with bad feedback, I see if there's not any constructive criticism there, just ignore it. I just don't care. Like, so I'm just like, whatever. Because I've had a lot of bad feedback in the past, not from like games and stuff, but even prior to that, and even like way before then, I'm used to feedback. Worked in a creative industry environment, so you're getting crapped on all the time if you're not doing a good job. And even if you're doing a good job, you're still going to get crapped on. It's like working for Chef Ramsay, you're going to get criticism regardless of how good or bad you are. So it just became something that's just, if there's no constructive side to it, I just disregard it. And even when I think it's the second Cthulhu game I ran for our group, like you're speaking about over 2.5 years ago now. I remember at one point there was it was like this one player in particular had complained about one bit, and the intro was far too long in the game, but there was big complaint at one bit. And I was like, no, I agree, I just, because that was really unsolicited feedback, alright? But I thought, you know what, I agree with the guy. So I was like, look guys, I agree with what this person just said, let me just speed it up. And they're like, no, don't. And I was like, well, I actually agreed, I wasn't upset or anything when I'd done it, I wanted it to move on, because I was sitting going, Christ almighty, this is 9:30 or 10 o'clock, and the last time I'd done a game it went to 4, and I was like, I'm not having that again. And I agreed with everyone's feedback on that. But with this one, I wanted to keep the pace moving. Part of that was just maybe an experience, I would say mostly an experience. But yeah. But anyway, after the game, that was the stuff that kind of came out, but really it was just the negative stuff. It's like, really the reason the intro was so long was actually mostly because of the group's decision to explore and investigate, and really we call Cthulhu a lot, you're not fighting all the time because you're going to die if you do that. So there was a lot of investigating, which is what Cthulhu does really, really well. Now it just so happens that the individual that complained about the terrible slow intro was somebody that wanted to pick a guy that didn't care about any of the stuff. Basically said, I mean, it was in the description, I don't care, I'm not going to get involved, I don't like my job, etc. So I'm going to sit in the van, basically, was the sort of vibe of the character. And not vibe, that's what they done, although there wasn't a van, there was like a boat or something, I can't remember exactly. So I mean, really a lot of their their lack of enjoyment came from intentionally disengaging from the story. Now from what I remember, unless one of the other guys was trying to soften it a bit, they were kind of like, I thought that was fine, not yourself, but the other guy. I'm sure they said it was alright, although they could have just been trying to be nice. But it's one of these things where, now really, I wasn't really that miffed with it. I remember at the time when they'd said it, I was miffed, but not at them. It was more, I'm just sitting going, I've made this mistake again. So I was like, no, I agree, let's keep it moving. They're like, no. And I said, basically, shut it, we're doing it, let's go. Because I agreed, it wasn't that I disagreed with the guy, but it was just funny that after it was like, I would have done that different, because, and this is what I would have done. And they gave the alternative, but it was like, the alternative was basically what I had planned. The only reason it slowed was because of player kind of choice. But that's something I encourage. I don't think you should change if an intro's going to be long, as long as people seem to be enjoying it. Now, part of my issue was probably trying to read the room because it was over Zoom. No, it was over Roll20. But I think that's where, even though after that game I was like, whatever, and I remember they had some more information about it. I think generally, the guys enjoyed it, other than that part, which was definitely the worst component. But really after that game I was like, right, that's fine. But I mean, basically the feedback was almost binned. Not like I didn't care about what they said, it was more just like, whatever, didn't really put any more thought into it because there was nothing really constructive. That kind of takes it on into the realm of how to give good feedback, and actually we won't, to be honest, I won't really go into how to give good positive feedback because actually it's dead easy. You say that was really good, if you do it often and you do it when it happens, there's ways at the table you can almost indirectly give it. You just go, oh, that's awesome,
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing as well, like if you're again at a table or if you're through Roll20 or whatever, and if you're doing kind of an organised break or a synchronised break, then at that point obviously different people are disappearing and then everybody's coming back, then you've got your kind of reset time and then that's you back into the game. So at that point there, that's when you can be given the feedback, and you can be given it, not as overt and as obvious as, oh, this bit here was good because of this and this. Even something as simple as earlier on when we went through the door and then we there was the trap door that took us into the basement, and wasn't expecting that. It really caught me by surprise. If that's what the person's aiming for and you're telling them how you felt at that point, then that's you giving them that feedback, but it doesn't need to again be structured and organised, and you don't need to come up with a big list of stuff. You're just genuinely saying what you felt and what happened at that time. And again, it touches to kind of what I said earlier on. As long as you're genuinely telling them what you felt and what you think, then that's what's going to create good feedback. Again, you can still give somebody a negative as long as it's genuinely what you think, and that is still good feedback as long as there's something that they can then take and build and use from. But again, I would avoid just solely giving negative feedback, because the danger is it appears it's a criticism rather than a critique, and then again that's where issues can potentially happen.
Yeah, I mean, positive feedback is actually dead easy to get right in terms of giving it. I mean, because you can give it at any time. I tend to go, oh, I love that monster, I love its cool abilities, especially if it's something that's like really unique. And probably you'll find that let's say there's a monster in a game you've played and it's something really different and you've never experienced it, it's probably because the person sat and made it, and spent the time. So, but even just saying, oh, I love that fight, that was awesome. Some people might ask, well, what was it about it? And then you can elaborate then, but otherwise you're fine, It's like when the guy that had run for his kind of first main game last week, he did a couple of really cool things. I said to him, because I know the guy was nervous about doing voices and stuff, but I thought the voices were great, because it's not something I tend to do. I've done it a couple of times and I don't like it because they were terrible. But he did good, and that encouraged me to do a voice for my guy, because I thought, that's great, this guy's putting effort in, why don't I give it a go? And I butchered some accent. I think it came from everywhere.
Some accent from some part of the globe.
But do you know what I noticed about it? One of the other players who started with no accent ended up doing one as well, but it naturally came out, probably because it was like, it got people more immersed. And I said that to the guy, I said, that was great.
And ultimately got people relaxed.
Yeah, I said to him, like, the voices were great, I actually really enjoyed it. Now, one of the player characters was like, oh, I hate English people, let's say it was an English accent the guy was doing. So I hate you English people was basically what the guy was saying in like a Russian accent. And the problem was, it was like, I said to the guy, look, you want to wrap that a wee bit, because the DM's doing his best here, and he might not realise that he means character-wise, because, the guy actually in real life gets done in by that particular accent the guy was doing. It wasn't English, it was something else, but he gets done in by it. So, and he'd said that, so I'm like, yeah, there's a bit of crossover here, dude, so just calm it.
Red flag.
Yeah, whereas it's harder to give good negative or constructive feedback, and basically you've kind of covered most of it, so I wouldn't labour it. I think it's just really important. Number one, it's better to share it probably privately, Now privately is probably the most thing, because I mean, going back to the guy from, I'm just giving it because this was the most recent probably that I've had, or at least can share. There was something that didn't actually work out that well, and there was even a rules thing that didn't work out, but I didn't challenge it at all or address it at the table or anything. I waited until we were kind of finished up, and I said, he asked how it went. I said, I gave him the stuff that I enjoyed, and I said there was this bit here, and I kind of explained it a bit, and he's like, oh cool, and then I queried the rule thing. It turned out I actually just had it wrong, because I misheard them, because I was taking notes and stuff for the guys, because I know what it's like trying to take notes when you're running a big combat sequence. So even just doing it unprompted, it gave that bit of security, and I was like, look, I don't mind, I'm just trying to work out how did it go like that, because I might have it wrong, and I was being serious when I said that. So I gave that kind of safer area to actually have that conversation, and if it was just, the story beat didn't work, or there was something happened that caused a bit of frustration with some of the other players, and I could see what he was going for, and I've been there, I totally get it. So I suppose maybe if you're giving that feedback, and being constructive, if you've got experience that you can actually share that was similar, that didn't work, definitely worth explaining that, before you hit them with it, that sucked, well, although you wouldn't say that, but explaining why something didn't work out for you and explaining how that might apply to a particular area. It's important just because it helps them go, okay, at least it's not like I'm being personally saying, my story sucked, or something I put effort into sucked. It's always better just to make sure that you're maybe addressing maybe the small thing that's caused a bigger issue, and just affirming the person that, like, it happens. That's whenever I've gave negative feedback. I don't think we've ever done it, 'cause we've never, like our group, Jamie and I's group, because it's never really came about. We don't tend to, and I know probably my version of honesty would be probably too harsh for others, but we've never had that discussion, whereas the other guys in one of the other groups entirely that I play with, we tend to actually be quite open with feedback. It's great, but it's because it's constructive. We tend to offer reasons, we tend to understand why it maybe didn't work the way the person thought it would work, and we then offer the reasons what we thought might have worked better, or we just go, okay, whatever, it's a small thing, but who cares, that was just something I thought didn't work so well, but it didn't ruin the game. That's important to say too.
Ultimately there's there's trust and understanding from the players and the DM that's there in that particular group. Because there was a recent encounter that we've played, Jamie and I have played, that didn't really work. It was a fight sequence. I just didn't think it was very well designed. There was a lot of issues regarding just how the sequence worked out. There was things that was like, I get what was going for, but it was clear that it wasn't designed that well, because really what happened was, 66% of the party was immediately incapacitated for the entirety of the fight, and it meant it was like 12-15 against 1. Now the thing is, I get what the guy was going for, so I don't really have kind of critique or anything. There's things I would have done to design that differently, and personally would have felt would have worked better. But the fact is that it doesn't really matter. It was a one-shot game, and the only critique I would give if I was ever asked about that game by the guy is if you're doing like a mandatory based mission, or quest or sequence or side mission, whatever it may be, as long as it's mandatory, it should be designed around the characters better, because really what it was if it was, it was really, I would say, a game or
encounter designed for a big party, because it was designed in mind to knock people out quickly. Now, we weren't expecting the absolute crap rolls that we all had for most of the game, but the fact is, it's going to happen sometimes, and it is a factor when you're designing encounters. But it's something that overall, though, I thought the game went well. I thought actually I did enjoy the game, although it did revolve around combat that I didn't think was particularly well designed. But that doesn't mean I didn't enjoy it, and doesn't mean I thought it was a terrible fight either. I just didn't think there was game mechanics thoughts I really thought about. I come from a game design background and stuff, so that's important. Like mechanics and actually the sequence and the game loop and feedback loop and stuff's all stuff I consider in games, and there was just bits missing. I mean, the DM said that at the time, but look, people make mistakes in designing encounters. Like, I made mistakes designing a dream sequence encounter, and I hit them with a dragon breath or something, and then I checked the stats for a dragon breath and thought, oh Jesus Christ, that's going to knock them out. And luckily one survived with single digit hit points. I was like, oh. But I said that to the guys. I said, look, I didn't realise it was something I threw in. It's okay though. Overall I thought it was well, but I think it's important, if there's ever just going to be flat criticism, don't bother. Just don't bother. It's not worth it. It's different if it's positive feedback. See, if you just say that's great, that's brilliant, that's fine. If you want to elaborate, go ahead. But when it comes to negative feedback, don't bother just saying that's crap. It's okay to say that's great, but if you're saying that's crap, don't, because you're going to hurt somebody's feelings. Doesn't matter how good a pal you are with them. Come in soft and provide constructive stuff in there. Now, it might be a bit, all I would say is if you've never really ran a game or a completely new player, I wouldn't try and advise how to do gameplay loops. It's not going to work. But you just give a personal anecdote. I liked the monster. I thought it'd be cool. Though I just didn't like how just target the thing that didn't work, not the overall thing. So if you thought I didn't like Fire Game that I was talking about, I didn't think it was well designed. Having a huge cone thing that would, really stun people. If you're unlucky, it's instant stun, and they're losing turns until they break out of it. Having something like that that's the only thing that made that quite a poorly designed fight, other than the fact that we were like 4 or 5 times outnumbered, which but that's okay because of the level we're at. But with having something that auto stuns you as well, and having various other casters, it's the instant stun thing that was really the only thing that was the main problem for me that made it a badly designed encounter, because the other components would have been okay in their own, but that in combination with that made it poorly designed. But that's something I would explain to the guy. But really, we've had the conversation. I know one other person in particular actually enjoyed the encounter, so not quite sure why, but because they never said why. That's the thing, they said they enjoyed it and that was it. But I know that they'll chat about it though. And
it's kind of bizarre the way it's worked out, because there's the 3 of us, so it's kind of it's really strange. I was kind of on the fence with that encounter, and I can vaguely see it from not vaguely, I can see it from both sides. Again, we've got another guy who really enjoyed it, and then you've got you that's got a few issues with it. Ultimately, I can see the issues that you had with it, and I've got 1 or 2 of my own wee bits and pieces, but at the same point, the kind of outnumbered thing, it didn't really faze or worry me too much when we were getting into it. If we were going into it and we were kind of tanking hit points really, really badly, then I'd be like, right, okay, hang on. I'd be seeing it from your point of view about the design, and the only real thing was the kind of the area effect attack that just killed all movement, killed all actions, and you were just
killed any interactivity for players.
You were just rolling dice and going, oh, that didn't work again. Oh well, rolling. Oh, that didn't work. Yeah, and as well, the DC on it was kind of relatively high, and ultimately, for me, the modifier that I had for it was 0. So it was just the straight rolls, and it meant that we were out of action for
pretty much the entire fight. I mean, really,
pretty much. But I'm trying to think about it. Maybe 7 rounds, maybe of roll. Oh, nothing happened. Right, back to you.
So I was going, oh wait, it's my turn again. But I mean, the thing is, it's like overall, like I was saying, I did enjoy it, but the outnumbered thing wouldn't be a problem. But that's where it was combined with that effect. I mean, really, this thing was a big tanky boy that would decimate you and poison you, and you would be taking constant hit points. I get it at this level, but it wasn't designed for 3 players. None of that was taken into consideration, and the main problem and. It's hard to change combat, or at least thought and prepared combat during this. Is why I wasn't bothered by it really during the game. After it, I still, even now, I think it wasn't well designed really at all. But you can't do anything about it. I actually enjoyed the monsters. I enjoyed the story. I enjoyed the creatures. And to the guy's credit, he tried to put a plaster in it when he stunned everyone. Went, oh god, I think I went in way too hard. Because not only that, he introduced a whole new mechanic and stuff which wasn't really played with, but really the plaster in it was, instead of kind of doing stuff to make sense, it went, okay, so the other guys are stunned, so the big man won't really do much, and basically everybody will you probably didn't have issues with the outnumbered thing because everybody fought me instead. Actually, you had about 8-9 mages going for one guy. But it's just it's interesting because it would have worked if it wasn't just that one pillar, by the way.
Yeah,
but
if we had NPCs with us to kind of even the numbers out a bit, so that they were moving and interacting, so that when the area effect came in, like even if it was myself and the other PC that was taken out, you would maybe have one other person there that's tagging along with you doing something else to kind of eliminate the kind of by yourself taking on 14 people thing, and the kind of sketchy aspect of maybe not making it through the encounter. But the other thing that was a bit kind of strange about it was that the area effect attack that came in that immobilised everybody, that only came in 3 or 4 rounds in. And if it was used earlier on and then the encounter started slowing down, you would, at that point, I'd be going, alright, okay, well, it's just not went according to the plan. Whereas the fact that it was after a while and then it got used, it made me kind of scratch my head a little bit at that one.
I mean, I think the idea was it was charging up, because I actually it's funny that he used that, because I did something similar for a different game. It didn't immobilise people, it just did loads of damage or something, but it was just one of these things where, and maybe in theory it looks good, but in practice it just doesn't. I mean, for me the big thing is that wasn't like an optional thing, well, it technically I suppose it was, but it's one of these things where it's like you're heavily coerced to do it, and there's all these bits that kind of make you go down that route. And it becomes something that it's like, I think the main thing was, I wouldn't have minded something like that if it was for something that was a big fight, whereas it was kind of like a thrown in threat for threat's sake. That's really how it came across. It would have been narratively a better thing if it was something that was designed, actually, you know what, this is maybe for another episode, actually designing encounters, because there's quite a lot of stuff there's a lot of reasons this encounter would have actually worked, but within the context and with a lack of consideration to various kind of bits of combat and things going on at this level, combat's something to really make sure it's getting looked at properly, to actually make, not to make it easier, but actually to make it difficult enough, because we're tanks, well, at least I'm I'm a totem warrior of the bear, I can smack anything, But anyway, it's something. The point is, it's about being constructive about it, and like, even though I'm kind of ragging on it and saying how I thought it wasn't a well designed encounter, actually the whole sequence around it, the whole setup for getting in there, the actual reveals that were happening, the actual mystery that was going on, the reveal as a big monster that actually tied in with previous stuff. I loved all that stuff. The encounter itself, it became just a rolling exercise. It just became like, all right, I'll do this. There wasn't a lot of variety for the type of fight it was for me. But anyway, constructive is, please be positive with it, and make sure you're giving guidance, if nothing else. So yeah, I think that's about it for that part of it for me.
Yeah, well, another thing that kind of popped into my head there when you mentioned about it. So as Jordan said earlier on there, his kind of background is game design and amongst other things. So when you're giving feedback as well, you need to think about who you are. So if I've designed an encounter, or if we even just look at that encounter that we were talking about, if Jordan then gives feedback about that and criticism about that to the DM, then what the DM's getting is somebody who's done game design and so on and so on and so on, saying that this particular aspect of it was either not up to scratch or, whatever it so happens to be. So then at that point, what's happening in this particular case is that you're getting, professional level criticism or a critique, depending on what way, the coin falls. So you need to be careful about who you are as well. If you've got a skill set that relates to this at all, and again, if you are somebody who does a lot of creative writing and you're criticising the story, as an example, even if you're not published, even if you're just doing it for yourself and everybody knows that you write but nobody really knows what it is or whatever, you are then a writer, you are then a storyteller. So you need to be careful with that level of with that type of criticism or critique that you give, and arguably you need to be more empathetic about the points that you make and put across. But at the same point, if you've got that skill set and you turn around and say it's great, then it's like getting 2 pats in the back instead of 1.
Yeah, totally. And the thing is as well, even though that is my kind of background, really, especially now with the amount of games I've run, that doesn't mean that all my games fights are going to be the best in the world. It doesn't mean my stories are going to be the best. And I'm not expecting games to be designed with all this stuff in mind either. For me, it's more just like a lot of these big combats that we've done have followed that. That thing. It's really a lot, especially early on. A lot of stuff was like instant stun. Really, if you failed your saving throws, you're basically losing turns until you passed. And it's a very kind of. It's a shame because it took away. But basically, the main issue with that particular thing, really, with like the 12 other guys, was think of it like fighting 12 skeletons, but they'd done 3 times the damage they do and have about 4 times the hit points. There wasn't. It was like the same guy, and it feeds in all these things. But this is why I'm not that bothered. Like ultimately, it's like that happened, whatever, And the guy himself during the game was like, I kind of might have screwed up a wee bit here. But that's fine, And if that discussion ever comes up, and he says, "Oh, how come we didn't think that didn't work?" That really my main thing would be from the game design perspective. There was those bits that didn't work, and that's probably the only thing that's came. It's not an individual issue that's came up before. That's actually came across several encounters throughout it, but it's not affected my overall enjoyment of the game. The only thing it ever has in the past has been things like there's a lot of kind of like oppression in it. There's a big theme of oppression and things like that. Now that's great to have that stuff, but when you're having it for a year and it's like it feels like there's no reward, I then kind of go, why is it I'm not enjoying it so much? Then I go, oh well, that's because there's no actual feedback loop, there's no reward, there's kind of there's none of that. So at least it helps me from a game design perspective. If I'm providing feedback for somebody's game, I can at least give something that, rather than I don't know, I didn't like it, I'm not sure why, at least I can kind of go, it might be because of that. But that again, that goes back to just making sure you're being constructive, because ultimately I could have just said I didn't like that game, that I didn't like that fight, I thought it was crap. That's completely useless feedback, because I didn't think it was crap, number one, but it also doesn't provide any substance for the person to chew on, but yeah, so I think that's maybe it from like the feedback sides of things. So I think the last point to maybe talk about is how feedback informs how you might run or how you might evolve your games. I don't know if there's anything you want to talk. I've got a very quick kind of example to use, but maybe finish with it. So if there's anything you want to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, it's kind of, for me, it's kind of going back and touching on some of the stuff we've talked about. If you're not being honest, then if somebody turns around and says, yeah, that's great, oh, fantastic, best game ever, 5 stars, whatever, however they're giving you the feedback, then what happens is then you run more encounters like that. You continue your game in that same vein, and you've got somebody that's sitting there bored, stiff, and you're not getting anything decent. So you need to be honest with what you're giving feedback, otherwise you're just ultimately hurting yourself in the long run. And it sounds ridiculous saying it, but I'm going to say it anyway, but making sure that you've got a process so that you can actually get feedback out and done. Now, whether that's you sit and you talk to the DM privately and go, I'd like to be given feedback here so that, I'm helping, inform the story or whatever, or whether you and another player talk about it and figure out the best way to talk to your DM, or whatever it is that's going on, right? Whether it's overtly getting discussed or whether it's subtly dropping hints here and there, whatever. You need some form of system, otherwise potentially you just get stuck doing the same thing again and again and again. And it might not be that you particularly need a system, because you've got a DM that's varying things all the time, and they're ticking all the boxes for you, but ultimately you need something there that you can feel comfortable in giving the feedback through whatever means. And if you don't feel comfortable giving feedback, then you then go, right, okay, well, ultimately there's something not quite right with the games, because everybody should be able to discuss things openly and all the rest of it. If you're scared to give feedback, then does that mean that the DM is overly protective of their story? If you're scared to give feedback, is that because you're not comfortable with the group due to some personality clash? Or if you're the person that's uncomfortable, then be honest with yourself why you're uncomfortable and try and figure that out. If you're not sure, talk to somebody else and try and figure it out with them. Or if you're the person that isn't uncomfortable but somebody's there and is telling you that they're uncomfortable, or if there's somebody there that's telling you that they're bored or they feel hard done by with a decision or this or that or whatever, then don't obviously go and talk to the DM without letting this other person know you're doing that, because that can seem a bit underhand and all the rest of it. But you, as somebody who is more comfortable, try and ring fence that person, because they're uncomfortable because they're new to the group, or whatever the reason is. Try and help that person through it, and again, ultimately that's going to benefit in the long run, because it's going to either tweak the game, or it's going to make them enjoy it more, or it's going to make them understand something that's happened. And again, in the long run, it's going to keep everybody happy.
Yeah, I think what you're saying there, I think that's actually really good, especially around, what was the bit you just said there? It was just talking about how you address things that maybe aren't working so well. So, because that's like with our group, we don't tend to have that feedback. We don't ask for feedback. We don't really offer it, because the thing is, we're just hanging out. That's really the point of it. We're hanging out. And there's never been something that's made me go, I want to stop playing. There's only ever been times where, like, that encounter where I went, that wasn't really a well-designed fight, but whatever, like, going back to the theme of, like, oppression I spoke about, it got to a point when, especially I was working 2 jobs at one bit as well, I'm sitting kind of going, I'm just not getting anything out of this anymore, but the thing is, we're meeting once a week, so it was never enough for me to be like, I need to, whatever. I tend to just go, right, that's it, done, see you next week, whatever. But it's important to make sure that if something does bother you with a game, it is worth, even if it's something critical, it's worth speaking to whoever it is that's maybe part of not causing the reason, but maybe help. Like, if it's a problem with the game, it's worth speaking to the DM and asking, what do you think? Like, I might not be enjoying it, and just explain maybe what those points are. I don't need to say I hate it, because you just need to say, I'm just struggling, because I was getting to a point when I was working 2 jobs and it was like everything's just, you're getting backstabbed, and this was like a year of being backstabbed, you know, and I was doing 2 jobs and I just was like, I can't really be bothered, and I was getting to a point where I was like, I'm probably going to cut down to once every 2 weeks, you know, just because I'm like, I'm not enjoying it, because not less so because of the game, although having the same theme and every encounter being very similar didn't really help either.
Yeah,
but
because ultimately the thing with that is that because it's a long-term campaign, it's not like every 3rd or 4th game is changing. If it's rather than a one-off encounter that you're doing, or not encounter, sorry, a one-off game, a one-shot, rather than that, and then like next week it's different, if it's going over 2, 3, 4 games, maybe a wee bit longer, you ultimately know at some point you've got your beginning, your middle, your end. If you enjoyed it, great. It's something that you can either do in the future, or it's something that you can get the DM to run again in the future, or something similar. And if it's something that you're not particularly enjoying, you go, it's okay, because it'll be done in the next couple of weeks. So although I'm not enjoying it as much as, you know, the last game that we done, I know that there'll be something new in the horizon. Whereas again, this game, you know the setting and you know everything that's happening, and at the point that we're at just now,
it took us 2 years to get there, number one, and I think the guys have realised I tend to just be like, right, let's get moving, I'm not interested in exploring, because it's like, I don't want to take 3 years to finish a flaming game, because I want to see what's happening, and that's the thing. But I've said that during the games, you know, that's not a criticism or anything. Most of the reason we're messing around is because we've decided to do that, you know. It's not, it's just, whereas it was really what kicked that off for me, was that point where it's like, we're still not even at a flaming middle of the map, and this has been 2 years. Yeah,
so again, from the feedback point of view of that, I think we're literally halfway now. 2 years to go.
But we've been at the halfway point for like 2-3 weeks now, though. But
true,
we've got stuff to deal with, though. That's the difference. Whereas before it was kind of like you wander and then there's some oddball fight or something. You know,
this particular village also doesn't like you, and exactly. So there's a couple of points that we've been at where it's felt a bit like repetition, and it's felt a bit like, rather than going, you know, the journey's taken in the game, the journey's taken months, so it's like at each kind of stage along that journey that you're getting what's happening, rather than, even if it was very generic, okay, right, you know, this happens, how do you want to deal with it, right, this, right, roll a couple of dice, see the outcome, right, next encounter, right, roll a couple of dice. So the travelling part is kind of being acted out rather than it being condensed as one potential thing. You know, other bits and pieces like that, but ultimately it's kind of, you know, at every point that our group travels to, they're seen as outsiders, they're not trusted, there's, you know, essentially racism going on, and we're in the receiving end of it, and that's happened from place to place to place to place, and we've yet to find a place along the journey that is actually neutral towards us.
Well, I'll give you one example.
Like not positive, just neutral.
Yeah, there's one example in the 2 years, I think probably a year and a half, there's been one NPC that hasn't been negative towards us, you know what I mean? And it's that, at least from a game design perspective, I can explain why I don't think that works. But you know, I actually think it might be worth doing an episode on that campaign.
Yeah,
actually, because the thing is, there's so many good bits about it too.
Yeah.
Obviously, you're just hearing the criticism stuff.
2 years worth of memories to go through.
Well, I mean, the thing is, we're going through the criticisms, but most of that is because really I'm kind of trying to describe actually talking about criticism, and actually it's worth, if a game's getting to the point where you're not enjoying it and you're actually just getting a bit frustrated with it. And really the only time that I've been actually getting frustrated playing it was when I was doing 2 jobs and it was the same stuff for basically a year. You know, that's really a point where you should be looking at approaching it and actually having a discussion and actually providing that critical feedback with constructive criticism, you know. But I think, sorry, go ahead.
Well, what I was going to say is, at that point, if you'd went to the DM at that point and went, look, because I'm doing the 2 jobs and this and that and whatever else, I'm feeling like this is stalling a bit. I want more pace in the game. Understand that it's a long-term campaign and understand that the journey is going to take, you know, many, many months to complete. But for me, Jordan, the player, rather than your character, I'm looking for a bit more pace. At that point, if the DM had then spoke to me and then said, in terms of the game, how are you feeling with pace and things like that, at that point I'd be going, well, I'm all right with it taking longer and things, but you know, as it stands, you know, we've went from here to here, it's taken quite a bit, and ultimately from this place to this place to this place to this place, we've kind of basically done the exact same thing. So taking a while to get there, I'm kind of okay with that, as long as we're kind of doing something productive along the way. If we're kind of rehashing the exact same scenarios in terms of the kind of broad and overall like theme that's going on, then well, what's the point, rather than the overall theme, like the big story is we're travelling to get back to our home city, which has been taken from us, so we're gathering support as we're travelling along. That's the main thing. And then the sort of subplot is, because of fights and wars and things, our group are on the outside looking in now because of changes in power and the way that, you know, everything's been governed across this, you know, the different kingdoms that we are travelling across, and ultimately this continent that we're on. And again, the thing is, you're going, would every single place that we would cross, would every single place be hostile towards us, or at the very least neutral but bordering on the side of pointing the finger and saying they did it? You know, surely there would be places that would be so small, that would have such a small amount of passing trade, that they'd just be grateful for any sort of extra boost to income. You know, surely that would be happening. Surely there would be different kingdoms that we would be crossing through that wouldn't actually have been, you know, sided against us. And, you know, without again going into the details of the campaign, because again we'll cover that in another episode if everyone's interested, but you know, that's the kind of the thing here and there that you're looking at and going, well, if that was tweaked, then that journey of many months, I would be completely happy with that, you know, being another 2 years. But at the moment it's kind of right, but we've done this, is kind of in the position that I'm in. So it's not the length of time of the journey that's the issue for me, it's just that it's kind of the same thing that's happening. Yeah, and so that's really the point of that all was, you know, if there is issues, it's kind of getting to you, because really that's been the only case where I've been like going, I don't know if I can be bothered with this anymore, you know, just in terms of frequency. And really the angle I was going to go at was, you just keep doing what you're doing, I'll see if I can have my guy take a passive role at a camp whenever I'm not there, you know. And it lets me get a break, it lets me kind of do my own thing and do my work, but get time to relax, which at the point I was not really getting any time other than like a Sunday afternoon and Saturday nights, but that was like dedicated for D&D, so the work thing made it become like work. So that there was a lot of factors that made me stop enjoying it quite a bit. So it means that if you've got any issues with someone and it is making you not enjoy it, it's worth bringing it up with the DM, but maybe don't open with the criticism, because that wouldn't go well. But I think really the kind of last thing I'd like to it's more just a summary more than a point to talk about, is, you know, regardless of the good or bad feedback, that, you know, I think this is more for DMs, that the feedback, or it's worth being wary of when you're a player, and we've touched on this a bit, is, you know, the feedback that you provide, it's going to inform the kind of decisions and themes and the things you will see more of, you know. Now, just because you say something's good doesn't mean you're going to get hit with the same thing all the time. But if you say, oh, I enjoyed that encounter, that scary monster was cool, you can be sure that you're going to get a cool scary monster later. Now, how similar it is and stuff, it'll be up to the DM to be creative. But this is where when Jamie's saying things like, oh, you maybe didn't enjoy something, but you say, that was great, you're going to be seeing more of that stuff that you don't enjoy. And it was like the same thing, even speaking about that, like doing the same things. Really the themes that we've experienced as oppression and betrayal, that's basically been it for 2 years, you know. Now there is new things coming now, but, you know, at the time where I was working a lot, that was becoming, I was just getting bored of playing, because it just felt like I was getting constantly, our team was getting backstabbed constantly, and it just meant like there was no enjoyment, there was no feedback look of fun, there was no pleasure in it.
So, but if I said no, I think that's going great, I would have got more of that, and then I probably would have just been like, oh, screw it, I'm probably not. I'll just start skipping every few weeks. You know, I would say to them, oh look, I'm going to be taking every second week now. You know, it's better just being honest, but just be aware that anything you say, good or bad, you'll probably see more of it.
Can be taken out of context.
Well, that's true. But the thing is, if you're enjoying it, share it, and you'll get more of it. Because certainly the themes, I think the guys that I was running that year campaign with, the other group that I was talking about, I remember one of them said, oh, I'd love to see more. This is more a passing comment. It wasn't like supposed to be feedback. They said, oh, I'm looking forward to seeing how like my family from their backstory is going to get involved. So while if I said what would make this more interesting for you, which is me opening the conversation for feedback, they might have said that. I'm more just being aware of what's at the table. But they're looking for themes of connection to their backstory, so that stuff I can weave in. So just be aware, whatever you kind of say, it will come back to well, it'll come back to surprise you or bite you. It'll be one of them. So, but it's worth it. So I think that's really it. That's kind of our take from me anyway. And if you've got thoughts, if you disagree, I mean, you might completely disagree with my example of game design and think that's a fine encounter for a hardcore game, which is important to mention. It's a hardcore game. That's totally okay. I'll just have to disagree with you, but that's okay. But we'd love to hear your thoughts on basically anything we've said, or if you please share your own experiences. You know, it's certainly good to hear either your takes on what we are saying or your takes on something you've experienced. But just, I think it's important, just even for us to grow as well, because we're not experts by any means. We're just two pals talking about D&D. So I think that's really it for me, and that's my kind of ask from you that's watching or listening.
Yeah, and again, just like Jordan's saying, the more comments, the more ideas, the more thoughts that are there, more ideas, thoughts that gives us, either for coming back and talking about something or putting it into our games or suggesting it to our respective DMs to maybe include as well if there's something there that, you know, sparks a bit of inspiration there. But I think all really that's left to say is thanks for watching or listening, depending on where you are. And if, you know, this has helped, you know, give us a thumbs up, follow us, subscribe, you know, all that good internet magic. And if not, give us the little thumbs down or leave us a comment and tell us what we should be doing. Give us some negative feedback, you know. Give us some positive feedback, you know, something. Here's
an exercise. What it does, give us positive feedback and give us some both constructive and just criticism, full stop, and we'll show you how to ignore the bad stuff and anything constructive we'll do. But no, seriously, can't wait to hear your thoughts, and thanks for watching or listening, guys, and we'll get you next time.
Thanks again.
See ya.